Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising tonight to continue to call on this government to get accountability and specifically a timeline on two-way, all-day GO train service between Kitchener and Toronto. It's been over a decade now that my community has heard promise after promise. Here's what then Liberal Premier Kathleen Wynne said to Craig Norris from CBC KW back in May 2014, quote, "We're making the two-way all-day GO a priority because I know people want to go back and forth. I can't give you the specific dates, but we want to get going on this right away." Well, her party was elected the very next month, and we never got a date for completion from her. Then back in 2017, the federal government committed 40% of the project cost. They put in over $752 million. It's $750 million. At the time, now retired regional chair Ken Sealing was thrilled, as he should be. He said, quote, "It is a strategic investment that recognizes the importance of the Toronto-Waterloo Region Innovation Corridor to the Canadian economy." Well, then the next provincial election came along, and in 2018, here's what Conservative Doug Ford said, keeping in mind he now knew about that federal money that was already committed. Quote, "We're going to have the pedal to the metal, and we're going to move forward. We're going to cut all the red tape and bureaucracy and gets in the way of these projects." Well, Premier Ford got elected that year. That was 6 years ago. So much for pedal to the metal. Where do we stand today after more than a decade after that first political commitment, despite constant political ads from the provincial Conservatives bragging about progress in my community? We have a total of 10 trains a day that go from Kitchener to Toronto and 9 trains a day from Toronto to Kitchener, only on weekdays. Every now and then, if we're lucky, Metrolinx will announce special one-off weekend service on a holiday weekend like the one coming up. Worst of all, we still don't even have a timeline for completion. It means that in my community, folks continue to get left on the platform waiting for overcrowded buses. It could be a commuter, for example. It could be someone looking to get to a medical specialist in Toronto, a family looking to get to a Jays game. One young person even shared with me this past summer that as a queer person, she'd love to take the GO to be able to date in Toronto. She wants two-way all-day GO for queer love. It's also about the climate. We need to give people more convenient, more affordable, and lower carbon ways of getting around, recognizing that transportation is the largest emission source in Ontario. Now, here's an example of what's possible. The Montreal REM rapid transit system opened last summer. It took just 5 years to go from prep work to doors open on a 67-kilometer line with service every 3 minutes and 30 seconds during peak hours. And while two-way all-day GO is, of course, delivered by the provincial government, folks in my community are tired of having different levels of government blame one another. If the federal government put in 40% of the money as they did, they should at least be demanding accountability on the funds. And so I've written to the minister, almost 2 years of letters now. I've raised it with the minister. I raised it with the Prime Minister a few weeks ago. I'm raising it again. When will this government call for accountability and specifically for a timeline from the province on two-way, all-day GO train service between Kitchener and Toronto?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's nice to be here in adjournment debate with you and some colleagues. I'd like to thank my friend and colleague for the question and the opportunity to talk about the Government of Canada's continued commitment to help build sustainable, inclusive, and climate-resistant communities. I understand that public transit is a foundational element to a thriving community, and I join my colleague in advocating for two-way both directions GO train service, two-way all-day GO train service, I should say, for Milton, because I also sympathize. Milton is in a very similar situation to Kitchener. We have been asking the provincial government to prioritize two-way all-day GO train service for Milton because Canadians depend on the trains and they don't want to sit on the highway in traffic in order to get to work. But the other problem in Milton is that we basically have 8 trains out in the morning, starting early, and the last one leaves around 9. And then those trains just come back in the evening for for a commuter type experience. But if you want to take a train on the weekend, or if you work shift work, or if your shift starts at noon or ends at midnight, you are out of luck. So it's important that we have two-way all-day GO train service, but also reliable all-day GO train service. Right now, Miltonians drive down to Oakville or to the Bronte station to get that service, and that kind of defeats the purpose, Mr. Speaker, because taking the train is a great way to reduce our carbon emissions, but it's also a great way to multitask. When I take the train, I send an email or two, listen to music. I suppose I listen to music while I drive as well, but we all depend on that, and that's why since 2015 we've made substantial investments totaling more than $30 billion, more than any previous government, for more than 2,000 public transit projects across Canada, and that includes Canada's first ever public transit fund, which I'm happy to say Milton will be enjoying, because we're a growing community with over 140,000 constituents now, and they are relying more and more, as we have one of the youngest demographics. So it's important that we continue to invest. And that's also why we launched the single largest ever public transit investment in Canadian history, as the aforementioned Canada Public Transit Fund. So starting in 2026 and 2027, this fund will take an average of $3 billion a year and make that available to help cities and communities deliver better public transit systems for Canadians. The fund will help communities of all sizes maintain existing transit systems and help plan for new transit infrastructure. But as my colleague correctly pointed out, the GO train service throughout Ontario, or the GTA I should say, is a provincial matter. I'll continue to advocate with my member of provincial parliament, and I know that my colleague has a great relationship with his member of provincial parliament, because they happen to be party aligned, which is quite unique for the Green Party. But the reason that we'll continue to do this together is because it will encourage increased use of public transit, increase housing supply and affordability. It'll allow for people who don't necessarily want to own a car or drive a car frequently to live in a neighborhood that they can afford. It'll improve public and active transportation options for everyone, especially Indigenous peoples and equity-deserving groups. So the Canada Public Transit Fund is made up of 3 different funding streams with the provinces, the territories, and the municipalities. They can all select from various funding options that'll best suit their public transit needs, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps if there's an opportunity for a rebuttal, then I'll be able to explain what those 3 areas are.
Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really fitting that the Parliamentary Secretary also represents an area along the same line that I've been calling for, two-way all-day GO train service, and folks in his community would benefit just as much as those in mine would. But I want to reiterate what it is that I'm calling for. In this case, the federal government did the right thing in putting the funding forward back in 2017. And as an investor that's put in 40% of the project costs, to me it's just so reasonable that the investor, in this case the federal government, would demand some accountability from the provincial government that's meant to deliver on the project. And accountability starts with a timeline for completion, which folks in his community and in mine deserve to have that accountability on federal funds. Will he be joining and calling on the provincial government to provide a timeline for completion on the project?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And more than that, actually, I've been working with my member of provincial parliament on a plan for two-way all-day GO. There's more than one way to say it, I suppose, but two-way all-day GO is an important priority for both the member from Kitchener and for me. And like him, the federal government has committed funding. And then at various times, the provincial government commits funding, but only when it seems to be politically expedient, Mr. Speaker. And I actually don't mind pointing out to my colleague how that worked. We had a by-election in Milton just recently. Doug Ford wanted a Conservative elected, so he had the Minister of Transport write a letter to the federal government saying, oh, by the way, we're already here to invest some money into both directions all-day GO train service for Milton. It just a matter of the federal government coming to play, which is kind of ironic because in 2021, Mr. Speaker, we committed that funding. We said, Doug Ford, come to the table, let's build both directions all-day GO train service for Milton, and unfortunately didn't fit his political goals at the time. But very much excited to talk to my friend about more train service for our two communities.